The relatives of some Israeli hostages have been taking part in protests against the delivery of aid at key border crossings into Gaza. Aid agencies say the flow of supplies is already insufficient to meet the needs of the hundreds of thousands of people now displaced inside the territory, with families and particularly young children bearing the brunt after 4 months of war.
The prices of basic supplies parents of young children need here have skyrocketed. Diapers are running low, and high prices mean many parents can't afford to buy them at all. While baby formula is hard to come by. A displaced mother says she's forced to feed her infant daughter ground rice and biscuits, even though it's making her sick.
It's common knowledge that this is unhealthy for babies. We know that it's causing intestinal distress, bloating and colic. You can see she's like this around the clock, crying non-stop. Last week we had to take her to the Al-Aqsa hospital 4 times. We know it's harming her, but nothing's available. What can we do?
Some women are now using cloth to replace diapers.
How can I get diapers? My husband's unemployed and gets assistance.
The spread of disease in refugee camps is creating an even greater need for medical supplies. Some 85% of Palestinians in Gaza have been displaced since the start of the war. Doctors warn densely populated camps pose even a greater risk of illness for young children.
What we're now seeing going around is hepatitis A. The infection resulted from densely populated places due to the war and displaced people in tents.
Meanwhile, at Israel's Kerem Shalom crossing with Gaza, Israeli protesters, including far-right groups and relatives of hostages, continued to block trucks of humanitarian aid. They're calling for deliveries to be halted until hostages held in Gaza are released.
We are here from all of the country for stopping the trucks from getting in to Gaza, into the Hamas. This is our mission, and today we did it.
Since the October 7 terror attacks, almost all food production in Gaza has been halted. For many desperately waiting for trucks to arrive, humanitarian aid is the only lifeline.
The U.S. Secretary of State's preparing for a day of negotiations in Israel as he searches for agreement to a proposed ceasefire deal for Gaza. Antony Blinken will discuss Hamas's response to the draft plan brokered by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt. And mediators are cautiously optimistic that Hamas and Israel could reach an agreement.
Hopes for a deal between Israel and Hamas are growing, as the militant group has given its response to a ceasefire proposal.
There's still a lot of work to be done, but we continue to believe that an agreement is possible and indeed essential, and we will continue to work relentlessly to achieve it.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Israel as he continues his Middle East shuttle diplomacy to help seal the deal. It would include the release of hostages in Gaza in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners by Israel. While not giving many details, Hamas released a statement saying it responded to the proposal in a positive spirit. But it added that it was asking for a complete ceasefire as well as the lifting of the Gaza siege. That seems hard to reconcile with the goals set out by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
We want total victory, and not only the elimination of Hamas, but also the elimination of its commanders and their heads.
The pressure on Netanyahu to secure a deal is high. Israel has confirmed that 31 of the remaining hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza are dead. The army believes that around 100 hostages are still alive. International diplomats are now scrambling to secure their return, which means that they're faced with one of the toughest tasks in this war, helping Israel and Hamas find a middle ground.
Let's get across to Jerusalem and our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters. Rebecca, it seems there has been some positive feedback, and Antony Blinken is cautiously optimistic about a deal here. How close do you think we are to seeing a new ceasefire between Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, Claire, that is certainly what we're hearing from the Blinken camp who arrived in Israel last night. They did see the Hamas counter-offer to that deal just briefly, just as they were landing in Qatar yesterday, actually, and then they discussed that. They're mulling it over, and obviously Blinken will be discussing that with the Israelis here in Israel today. As you heard in that piece, as we're hearing from Antony Blinken, he says he's cautiously optimistic, if you will, but there's still quite a long way to go. The devil is in the detail. The framework, the overarching framework seems to basically have been agreed upon by both sides. But what we're seeing with the Hamas counter-offer, and though we don't know many of the details, is that they are still pushing for this permanent ceasefire, a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops in order to fully agree and get on board. Now, that is something that Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said absolutely no to. So whether or not Antony Blinken and the rest of the negotiating team can really get the two sides to meet somewhere in the middle still remains to be seen. It has to be said, these things, they're not over the line until they are over the line. If it's not 100%, it's 0%. So whilst there is cautious optimism, we could be some days, weeks off, and there's still every opportunity that things could fall through. But certainly looking positive at this stage. We should know more in the coming days.
And let's take a quick look at Netanyahu's stance here. I mean, he has vowed to continue this war until total victory, by which, of course, he means wiping out Hamas. I'm curious whether you think this recent news of more hostage deaths in Gaza could affect his calculations here.
That's hard to say exactly whether or not that's going to affect his calculations, but he's coming under increasing pressure from the hostage families and an increasing number of Israelis who are demanding the return of the hostages. And that's in competition, you could say, with the demands of his own far-right coalition. They are saying absolute victory, the end of Hamas will stop at nothing. And so you've got competing interests there. And Benjamin Netanyahu certainly fighting for his own political survival, trying to sort of balance those two counter objectives. But whether or not, this will change anything, obviously the news of more dead hostages puts more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. It certainly angers the Israeli population, and it certainly angers the hostage families who've been demanding now for weeks and months that they do more, that the government do more to try and get the hostages out. So the pressure is definitely ramping up, but Benjamin Netanyahu, I don't think will agree, or the government certainly won't agree to a complete ceasefire. It's looking, they've said time and time again that they won't do that. So, pressure, yes, but whether or not that will affect an outcome certainly remains to be seen, Claire.
And coming back to this proposal that Blinken is hoping to secure, what do you think it would take for Israel to agree to this deal?
Well, both sides, obviously, in any negotiation can't look like they're giving away too many concessions, and that's certainly something that Israel is aware of. I'm sure it's something that Hamas is aware of, is why they've come back with a counter proposal again. Israel, as I said, Benjamin Netanyahu coming under increased pressure to see some kind of positive movement on this, to see a release of some of these hostages, will come some way to agreeing. They already have tacitly agreed to the framework put in place. So it is looking likely they would agree to a limited ceasefire, to more aid going into Gaza in return for those hostages, and to see the release of some Palestinian prisoners in exchange for that. The exact number of Palestinian prisoners is not yet known. When the last deal was struck, the ratio was 3-to-1, 3 Palestinian prisoners for every hostage. We could see something like that be agreed upon again, but I think the Hamas side are demanding for more now. Time is running out for them as well. They're losing their clout. If they give up all the hostages, then what else do they really have as a bargaining chip? So, both sides still very far apart, even though we're seeing those positive signs. Exactly what Israel will agree to will certainly only be something that they can sell to the domestic audience here and also to the Americans, keeping everyone on side, and certainly something that Benjamin Netanyahu will only agree to, something that he can sell to the far-right members of his own party.
Rebecca, thank you for bringing us up to speed there. That's DW's correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, reporting from Jerusalem.